Great. Okay. Yeah. Welcome, everyone. I'm so happy everyone joined us today for this discussion on sustainability. Um, we're going to take a minute to just introduce ourselves really quickly. I'll start. My name is Randi Kearney. I am honored to be a HundrED ambassador. I work at MUSE School in California in the United States. I manage the early childhood program there. And as a MUSE community member, we are thrilled we are going to be having HundrED with us next year for this sustainability spotlight. We are a highly sustainable school, completely plant-based, and we have a sustainability curriculum that all our students follow around food, energy, and water. So I'm thrilled to be here and to hear some of the wonderful discussions and innovations that are going on around sustainability and education. So I'm going to let's see, Natalie, do you want to kind of introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to meet you all. So I'm Natalie. I've just joined the HundrED team about 3 weeks ago. So I'm the newest, I'm the newbie member. And I'm a researcher, and I'm running the Sustainability Spotlight, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, that's all for now, I guess. I'll be speaking to you in a minute.
Perfect. Karen, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yes, hello, my name is Karen. I'm an American, but I live in Denmark, where I helped start a small school that focuses on sustainability, both teaching about sustainability and teaching sustainably. That's it.
Perfect, thank you. And then Cleary, do you want to just give a quick hello? All right, I'm not sure I heard Cleary, but hopefully we'll get that figured out. So I'm going to turn it over to Natalie, who's going to kind of introduce what we're focusing on today and why and what HundrED's doing as far as all that. Oh, perfect. So here's our agenda for our quick afternoon together, if you want to take a look at what we'll be leading towards today. So I'm going to turn it over to Natalie to start off for us.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to say, Jess isn't joining us because she has a prior arrangement. So just got me, I'm afraid. It's just me. But yeah, at HundrED, we very much kind of focus on issues that come from a very bottom-up approach. And from that, I mean what practitioners are telling us, what our youth voice is telling us. And so this spotlight came from MUSE in California. And, you know, being so passionate about sustainability is something that kind of we caught hold of. And again, from our youth global survey that we are just writing up our report on at the moment, that kind of gave us information that over 50% of the students that were involved in that saw sustainability and environmental education as a key area that they thought would kind of have impact on their future lives, and wanted to know more about it. So we're listening to what people are telling us. It's been in the education sector, from policy, from the big names like UNESCO, for over 40 years. Now, my history is that I used to be a science teacher. And so when I started the research about sustainability a few weeks ago, I was actually really surprised to find out all of the things that were happening at policy level not really being filtered down to kind of the grassroots, the practitioner level. And so, you know, we've just finished the UNESCO decade of sustainability, of sustainable development. And I knew nothing about it as a science teacher in the UK, in London. So this is a huge issue in traditional education. Where is the sustainability education? Where is the environmental education? Quite often it's tagged into science subjects, or it's tagged into geography as well, depending on if geography is chosen to be studied, then that is potentially lost by a lot of students at a certain age, depending on what country we're talking about. But it's kind of an add-on, and it's not really dealt with on a very kind of holistic level. And in terms of the research that's been conducted, some of the research, there were kind of these three different camps, and there's this idea that is it education about the environment, is it education in the environment, or is it education for the environment? And there's been a big change in just education about the environment to a move into education for the environment. And what that difference is that it's not just learning about what's happening and kind of it's not knowledge based so much anymore. There's kind of an action competence attached to it. There's an action element of it where we're not just, where we don't just want to know about it, but we want them to live it as well, because we're looking at, you know, generation after generation, we're looking at exhausted resources, we're looking at issues about climate change, we're looking at issues with global warming. So if there isn't an action that happens from that knowledge base, then how is anything going to change? How is anything going to evolve? So the research more now on the policy that we're starting to see come through in the kind of more recent years focuses on this word sustainable and sustainability, or education for sustainability. And there is a really big change in that. So where I am currently in kind of the spotlight is that I'm piecing together all of the literature into what education about the environment, for the environment, environmentally related education, I'm calling it, about what that picture looks like today. That's what I'm doing at the moment. So still in like the fairly early stages of piecing that picture together, but I'm starting to see this kind of transition from not just knowledge based to kind of action. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about that, or if you'd like me to go into it a bit further, if I can.
Yes, please. If you'd like to go a bit further, I think we have a few more minutes. Go for it.
Sure. Is there anything specific that anybody would like to know? I'm kind of thinking everything I'm doing at the moment is fairly broad brush strokes. I know that kind of when I'm looking into what's out there at the moment in terms of innovations, a lot of the outside of academia, because a lot of the academia, which is where kind of is my first kind of port of call, that's what I'm used to researching. So that's what I kind of tackled first. That literature looks at how well the policy is implemented and how it affects kind of pedagogy. So how well is the teaching of it and how well is the learning of it? And so there's a lot of talk about environmental literacy. So can students talk about it? Again, there isn't so much of the doing. Are researchers measuring a change in behaviour of the children that are taking part in these educational practices? That's something that I think is starting to come through much more recently, but there's not an abundance of it. I was recently at a conference that included teachers and a range of people from a range of different organisations. And the thing that was really clear in terms of traditional schooling, the problem with it is that there needs to be a champion teacher, somebody who is passionate about the environment, passionate about sustainability, to lead that cause in a certain in a school environment. Because when you look at, especially, this is a very kind of London-centric conference, so I apologise for being just about London this bit. But the focus was very much about, the focus we have in the UK is very, in terms of schooling, is very driven, it's driven by academic achievement. And so if it doesn't benefit the school in terms of academic achievement, then the school potentially doesn't really want to know about it. And so this is why it needs somebody who's passionate, who's willing to give up their time and potentially self-fund after school clubs, extracurricular things to get the children involved, which is a huge shame because it doesn't implement this holistic way of living. And this is, I think, what really sets apart the innovations of the guys that we've got represented here today, is that it is very much being championed by somebody. And there was a lot of discussion during this conference about how we can make sustainability, education for the environment, whatever terminology you'd like to use, how we can make that a feature of traditional schooling. And it's a very big ask, because there's obviously a lot of barriers. There's funding, that's the main issue, unfortunately. There's what is important for the school, even though these huge companies like UNESCO, the United Nations are saying this is a problem. This is an issue that our children are going to encounter. They need to know about it. We need to action change. How are we going to do it? But unfortunately, it's not a priority, which is a huge shame, because I personally feel like we're letting down future generations. I have children myself, and it is unfortunately something that is ignored in schools. When during my time at schools, it was ignored. So it is definitely something, like, the picture doesn't look too rosy at the moment. That's basically what I'm what I'm starting to find out, is that it doesn't look too peachy. And thank goodness for kind of innovators out there who are pushing the limits and pushing barriers and looking for alternative ways that we can do this.
So Natalie, we had a couple questions pop up in the chat. The first was kind of what the goal is moving forward with this partnership with MUSE and the spotlight being done in sustainability. What's the ultimate kind of goal for coming of that? And then Marcus asked that about 5 years ago, and I agree, this was a very hot button issue. Everyone was speaking about sustainability, and it seems to have dropped off recently.
Yeah, and I think that drop off is a shame. And there are sustainable development goals that are in the press. But I think the thing for HundrED is, the very basis of everything we do is focused at seeking out the innovations and spreading them. So sharing that practice. And if somebody can, so we have this, we have the conference in November in LA, which will be hopefully spreading the information wide and far. But it's all about publishing, getting the word out there, dissemination of this information, because I think there are people out there that want to implement something, but they just don't know how. And so by getting inspired, I think, by what some people have already done, sharing is caring as far as I'm concerned. Being in the research world is all about getting innovative practice out there. And what's so great about this is that there are no hoops to jump through. A lot of problems with the academic research is you need to have simple things like you need to have a login to get onto a database to read an academic paper. It isn't necessarily written in a particularly friendly way, so it doesn't reach wide audiences. You have to be looking in certain places, you have to be in certain circles. This isn't what HundrED is all about. It's all about making it accessible for everybody. So, you know, through the use of social media and Twitter, you know, there are networks out there that kind of, I think, a lot of us at HundrED and a lot of the ambassadors are able to get this information out there wide and far. And even if it's a small element of an innovation that gets implemented somewhere else, then it's still small steps to get things out there and to make social change.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that that idea that there needs to be action attached to the curriculum is so important. So we're lucky enough to have some people here today who are putting this into action. So I wanted to turn it over to them. So these are innovators who have innovations in sustainability that are working and that they're using. So Karen, am I saying that right? I hope, from Snail-based learning, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of share your story.
Thank you. Well, I run a small school in Denmark. It's 4 years old. And 5 years ago, my co-founder and I, we have 4 daughters between us. We couldn't find a school that worked for us in terms of preparing our kids to live in a sustainable world, live in a sustainable way, and also to make the world more sustainable. We wanted a school that was a transition project. It was a transition school. And we want to equip our kids both to take charge themselves of their lives and helping out the planet, but also making the world more equitable, more sustainable, and safer for everybody. And by everybody, we didn't mean just people in Denmark, our own kids, but also other peoples and the animals and plants that we share the planet with. And a lot of the people talk about with environmental content, learning about the environment. What we particularly work on is not the content itself, although we do teach about the environment and sustainability, but we also try to work very much on the framework that makes our children better equipped to transition our world to be more equitable and more sustainable. So what we want to do at our school is to create children that are more comfortable with change and challenges, that the framework that we're working within can change quickly and the expectations that we have can be foiled. We want children who can take charge in their areas of expertise or in their local area, or even who can be leaders in areas where a leader is missing. So it might not necessarily be their expertise, but just somewhere where somebody needs to take charge and bring people together. We want to bring kids up to make things up as they go along, to not wait for somebody else to come up with a solution or wait for the perfect moment when all the information has been gathered, but simply start working on solutions as soon as possible. And we want to have kids who are comfortable going it on their own, but also who have the skills to bring people together to collaborate. And so we have 3 main areas in our school that we work on. We are a school with a lot of hands-on action. We garden, we build, we go places, we solve problems, we dig holes, we collaborate a lot, we make things all the time in real life. There's a lot of action. Even the older kids are constantly making things and building things. And we believe that that's part of preparing them to take charge and make a more sustainable world. The second thing we focus on is we have a lot of self-direction. The kids get real choices about what they want to do, what they want to work on, and how they want to work on it. Do I want to do this now? Do I want to learn about something else than the others are working on? What do I need to finish in order to get to the next step? And that's both an impulse-driven decisions about what you want to work on or learn, but also to train reflection about where am I at? What skills, what knowledge do I need to complete the tasks that I want to complete? And the third thing is that we're aware that one of the focal points of a changing world, but also changing the world, is knowledge. And there's an important knowledge component to sustainability and to learning and knowing sustainably. In order to learn sustainably, that is, to keep on learning our whole lives, we have to prepare children if they want to keep learning throughout their lives. They have to know about their strengths and weaknesses. They have to know about their learning styles. They have to be comfortable with perceiving and acting without enough information. They have to be able to be open to different kinds of knowledge, personal knowledge, local knowledge, experiential knowledge, scientific knowledge. And they have to be able to, pull different kinds of knowledge together, information and data, people's experiences, adapt it to local challenges, local situations, and deploy it. And one of the really important things that we focus on too is being able to let go of outdated knowledge, of useless knowledge. And that's not just data and information knowledge, but the knowledges that don't serve us any world about how to collaborate or how to solve problems or even how to view the world. These are all knowledges that aren't serving us anymore. So of these three areas of lots of hands-on action and lots of self-direction, the first two that I just named are the easy ones. It's easy to create a school where we do a lot of things and we give a lot of choice. The challenge is how kids learn, not only what they learn. And the way that we did that is that we adapted this. I'm going to try to share my screen now. We adapted a model, a didactic tool. Excuse me, it's taking me a moment. Can you all see my screen? We adapted this model from Australian scholar Vaughan-Lee. And what we do is we have all our learning and teaching in the school structured according to in projects. And every project follows this model. So it's a planning tool for the teachers, and it's also a way of thinking about what it is that we're going to do along the way. We always start by experiencing something together. For example, if we have a thematic project about the ocean, we may go down to the beach and take off our socks and shoes and go paddling in the water. Or we may go to the aquarium together and experience the fishes there with all our different senses. The second phase, which to me is one of the really important phases, is retaining knowledge. So we talk about what we experienced and we hook those experiences onto what we already know. We compare how cold the water was or our favorite fishes to other experiences at the beach or fishing with our grandparents. And based on experience and discussing these experiences and hooking onto what we already know, we go on to be curious, to talk about what we wonder about and what we would like to experiment with. And in the third phase, the children experiment. And sometimes we help them along by giving them tasks that are experimental tasks. For example, if we go to the forest, we may say, well, why don't you guys collect as many kind of mushrooms as you can? And afterwards, why don't you try to sort them? And the children will break up in groups and they'll sort the mushrooms. And some will sort according to color and some according to size. And when they're done sorting, we can transition into phase 4, where the teacher then explains to the kids, well, what you've been doing is basically what scientists do, scholars of mushrooms. And this is how they sort mushrooms, and they use the same tools that you did, the morphology of the mushrooms. And then we learn about the morphology of mushrooms. What are the different parts called, and why do we sort them in this way? So in phase 4, working academically, we have a very different way of approaching the material than we did in phases 1, 2, and 3. Here we're receiving knowledge and we're putting it together with what we've been working on in phases 1, 2, and 3. And finally, in phase 5, we pull together all our knowledge into some kind of a product. And it can be an academic product, it can be a presentation, or it can be a poster, a diorama, but it can also be a sensory project, a work of art, a mushroom stew, so that we can show that we can tell the edible mushrooms from the poisonous mushrooms. And after that, we reflect on what it is we've learned, Sometimes the children participate in setting up their own learning goals. Sometimes we have some learning goals that we've shared with them, and we reflect on how we reached those goals and which ones we didn't reach and why not. So all in all, this very overarching model structures our projects. And what it does along the way is it allows the children and the adults to assume different learning and knowing positions. There are positions of being curious and positions of being ignorant and of being the expert and of also having personal experiences of something. And then there are positions of knowing expert knowledge from science or from in technical jargon or scientific jargon. And this creates, as we see it, children who are familiar with the process of creating knowledge. They're at the forefront of accessing and using knowledge and harnessing the various skills they pick up during the projects to use knowledge for their own personal lives and further later on in their careers. And if you go down, you can see here that there are 3 sub-phases in the Snail that allow the teachers to choose actions. That's the outer phase of the Snail. And to talk about which roles both the adult and the children will play in each phase. And also what kind of knowledge or language is at play in each phase. So in the experiencing phase, we have unthematic knowledge, very tangible and everyday knowledge. As we move along, we come to, in phase 3 with the knowledge to be more systematic. When we reach the academic phase, the knowledge and the language is more systematic and structured. And when we reach the last phase, we are talking about more abstract, systematic knowledge that we can model or express in a way that we can share with others. So I don't know that I have so much more time to share the Snail with you, but I hope that you can see that we work very much with teaching the children to be dynamic knowledge creation.
Thank you so much. That is really incredible. Does anyone have any questions for Karen before we move along? You can post it here in the chat if you do. I actually have a quick question. How do you find it difficult to defend this kind of hands-on learning to parents who aren't used to this sort of education or who didn't grow up with as progressive or meaningful as education as your?
Yeah, we certainly do. We spend a lot of time in entrance interviews, making sure that we have the same expectations, we have the same horizon of expectations with the parents who choose the school. But there's a strong feeling in our culture that learning only happens when kids are sitting on their bums in front of tables. And the minute there isn't a grown-up telling children things, we and the children and the parent have a hard time realizing that learning is going on. So it's an ongoing project for us to change the code of when learning is happening. Yeah.
Yes, always a difficult task. We have a question here from Elizabeth in the chat who is asking if students connect and share with other children their projects. Is there an online platform for that? Or in the school even? How do they go about?
Well, the children work together all the time. They're in small groups of about 15 to 17 kids at a time, and they go out and experience together and experiment together and learn together. And sometimes they will choose to do projects together, and sometimes they will work individually. It very much depends on what kind of a project it is, but they share a lot. And especially in the last phase, the review part, a lot of the evaluation is showing what you've learned and other people understanding it and seeing it. So definitely the kids work together a lot.
Great. And Natalie, that's a good question. I was wondering as well kind of how you measure your outcomes. It seems as though they're reviewing their own outcomes a bit, but is there a way for teachers or parents to measure the outcomes as well?
We don't do an awful lot of measuring in the traditional sense. We don't have tests or grades of any kind. But we have a strong assessment culture, I would say, which means that the children are actively involved in formative assessment, both within the projects. And then the last project of the year is a project where we all participate in reviewing the different projects we've done throughout the year. So there's assessment there as well. And then, of course, when the groups are so small, there's a lot of adult-child contact. And the adults are very well connected with what's going on for the kids and where they might have challenges. The older kids have a mentoring arrangement so that they actually work a lot one-on-one with their teachers.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be mindful of our time. Karen, if you can look in the chat, there's some extra questions there for you as well to look at. But I'm going to have to move along to Cleary, who is here from the Global Oneness Project. So I'm going to turn it.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
You
Yes.
can? Okay, good. I'm taking off my headset here. So thanks for the invitation to join you guys. It's really a pleasure to join you. I'm Cleary Vaughan-Lee, the Executive Director for the Global Oneness Project, which is one of the 100 innovations. And the Global Oneness Project is basically a multimedia education platform. We've been around since 2006. And basically what we do is we are storytellers, and we're committed to really the exploration of global cultures. So we've been traveling the world for the last 12 years. One of the very first stories that we told, actually, one of our founders went to Australia, and he in 2006 was invited to spend a month with the various Maori and Aboriginal leaders and communities in New Zealand and Australia. And he started to interview them about their cultural traditions. And that led to one of our very first films called The Land Owns Us. And the reason I share that is because that film kind of documents Bob Randall, who was a traditional Maori leader, and his relationship to the land. And so from a storytelling perspective, we document short documentary films, and we also host photo essays. And all of those really document social, cultural, and environmental issues taking place all around the world. So you're looking at big issues such as climate change, migration, everything from poverty and food insecurity, water scarcity, and those kinds of issues. All of our resources are for free, and we also connect those media pieces with lesson plans and curriculum. So you can come, teachers can come to our site, you can watch a short film that ranges in length from 3 minutes to 25 minutes, or a photo essay. And then there are these very in-depth curriculum to accompany those, which dive into very specific questions and reflective writing prompt activities, which encourage students to really think about these larger meta global issues that I just mentioned, but then you're kind of trickling down into these specific questions, and students really get a sense to really address what does that mean in their local areas and in their personal lives. And so, one question that I always like to throw out there is, how can we prepare students to become perceptive and engaging global citizens? And that particular question, I think, relates to sustainability. And what's interesting is that sustainability, as all of you were sharing, are really kind of specific actions, but also different thoughts that we can all encourage students to kind of think about in their daily lives, but also obviously for the future. So when I think about that word sustainability, another word that comes to my mind is kind of endure, how to endure for our lives, how do things can sustain over time, and kind of those specific choices that we all make. And so what we try to do is to bring out those issues about sustainability. And I also like to talk about environmental sustainability, but also cultural. What are the choices that we can make? How is that related to environmental sustainability? It's all connected. So I'll just share a couple examples. One is we've documented a short film called Ile de Jean Charles, which documents a very small piece of land in Louisiana, in the United States. And it's a small piece of land that's basically diminishing because of global sea rise. And they say in about 50 years, this place will be basically gone. It'll be underwater. So this particular film documents the people that are living there and their connections to their home, and how they've seen this land change over time. So when you come to look at the curriculum, we provide additional secondary resources for comparisons and contrasts for students to kind of make their own connections. And so there's photographs of the land there in the 1960s to the present day, and they can make these connections in climate change and how that has impacted that particular place. And then another film is called Yukon Kings, which documents a Yupik fisherman in Alaska. And this is a film which documents that their subsistence way of life is on the decrease. They've seen a massive change in the salmon population due to climate change as well. And so that's another entry point for students to come in and see from a personal lens how climate change is impacting communities and individuals on a personal level, which I think is important, because if climate change, and as one kind of aspect of sustainability, can be very elusive and very big of a topic. So how can you make it personal, and how can you make it relatable for students? So that's one way. And then, so we're really, as a storytelling perspective, we're really trying to document people and places that have incredibly unique relationships to our living planet and how they've been sustainable. And we do a lot of documentation of indigenous cultures. So many of them have been living sustainably in accordance with the land for many, many years. And so how can we learn from them? How can we encourage students to kind of think about the choices they make, but also dive into historical aspects and cultural aspects as well? And then I'll just mention too, we just published a new VR virtual reality piece called Sanctuaries of Silence. This is a new medium that we're kind of getting into, and I'm learning a lot about, which is, it's really interesting. But this particular film is called Sanctuaries of Silence, and it documents an acoustic ecologist who documents the Hoh rainforest in Washington state. This is supposedly the last square inch of silence where noise pollution hasn't yet come in. And so what's really interesting, we just screened this film with California at an environmental youth forum, and elementary students all the way to high school students. And it was really interesting to see their experience and to talk to them, because what the film does is really encourage students to question and challenge their relationship to silence in meaningful ways. And I don't think that many people and have really considered what our relationship to silence is. And I think that also has a very big component to sustainability and our relationship. I mean, we can't talk about sustainability without our relationship to ourselves and how we can live in natural accordance to who we are and the values that is within ourselves before we can be with students and learn with students as well. So teachers come to our site and they share our resources in a variety of ways in their classrooms, whole districts too. And we are, thank you to HundrED, making a lot of different global connections. So we're starting to have conversations with different classrooms and educators all around the world. And so that's my short story. I'll open it up to everybody if anyone has any particular questions.
If anyone has any questions, you can shoot them in the chat there. I also think you kind of answered in the chat earlier. We were discussing how teachers don't necessarily have access to curriculum around sustainability. So it is up to the teachers to kind of figure it out on their own. So what you're creating here is something that's really needed for educators. So that's very cool. Any other questions before we hustle on? No? All right, you can put them in the chat at any time. So I think we're going to move on. Do we still want to break into small groups, or should we keep this as a larger group? What do you think?
I think we can maybe go into smaller groups for say 10 minutes and then come back and share. So we can still get to talk to each other and everyone gets a space to share, and then I can get everyone back. Is that okay with everyone?
I think that sounds good. So we're going to put up on the screen some leading questions. If you want to screenshot this or scribble these down really quick, because they'll disappear once you're set into groups. So we have, what does sustainability and education mean to you? How do you promote sustainability in the work you do? What are the biggest challenges? And how can we help to solve some of these issues, and any other innovations? And then I guess anything that you were inspired with our last three speakers as well, if there's anything you want to bring up while we're in those groups. And then when we come back, we'll have kind of one person from each group share the big points of their discussion. So I'll let Graj break us into those groups now.
Okay, I'm gonna turn this into, it will be just 2 or 3 rooms, and there'll be 2 or 3 participants. Everyone gets some time to discuss, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. I'll give some warnings just so that we're on time. But all right, see you guys in smaller rooms.
That in Melbourne. It's called it's called Press Hill. It was like Summer Hill, but an Australian version of Summer Hill. Yeah, so I kind of can relate to that, where they had a lot of options and they could do many things at different times. Yeah, like Summer Hill. But yeah.
And you're in Finland now?
Yeah.
And you're a teacher?
Yeah. I'm a teacher this year. I've been a teacher for like 10 years, but this year I'm working with some
energy building in North Carolina, and it's a K-8 charter school. And so I think the challenge is, how do we bring this into traditional public schools that don't have the funding? And maybe they have maybe additional challenges that other schools don't have.
Exactly. Yeah, I think I present quite a bit for MUSE about, what we do here in sustainability.
Yeah.
And we're lucky enough to do it on a really large scale because we're in the mountains and we have this gorgeous campus and we have hundreds of garden beds and these panels that run all our energy. So what we get a lot back is, that's great. I can't do that. So it's about adjusting it for your own classroom and starting small.
Think about sustainability in the school setting. I always thought about it of just like being in touch with nature and trying to like maintain it. My school in Mexico, it was mostly about that. Like we had, like the solar panels, and then we sometimes like worked in the garden, and that's what we were told sustainability was about. So it's interesting also to hear this side about like the cultural sustainability. And so I'm curious to talk more about that.
I think we have everyone back now, correct? We have everyone back? Perfect. So this is kind of just time to share what you spoke about in your rooms. Does anyone want to kind of volunteer? Anyone had some really insightful, intelligent things they'd like to share with all of us?
I could start, and then maybe Natalie and Jordy can jump in.
Absolutely.
We just kind of ended our conversation with kind of sustainability and what would be the most impactful way to kind of approach environmental and sustainable education. And we all agreed that it has to do with a relationship first to ourselves and being connected to our local environments. Natalie was saying that if you can do that and you can connect to your local environments and have students really resonate with that and make personal connections, then something is going to stay with them for the rest of their lives. She also said that it's kind of lifelong learning. It's giving them the skills to kind of make those connections young, so that as they grow into adulthood, that those they're able to kind of sustain those connections to themselves at the same time. Natalie, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just picking up from the world of research, which is what the hat that I have on today, is that there is an abundance of research out there that talks about, similar to what I said on the chat, that this kind of the idea of a child-led learning approach, and the idea of it's all about, as well as child-led, it's also about it being real and it resonating with the child. And if you can get these words that kind of pop up a lot, and they each have their own very separate research fields, is curiosity, inspiration, and motivation. And they all lead to engagement and deep learning and success in that learning. And these were kind of the skills that kind of Karen was talking about earlier. They lead to self-regulation. They lead to the ability to switch tasks in different, it's called like cognitive switching. It's having the ability to kind of do one task and then kind of go, oh no, actually I'm going to do this. And these are all things that are malleable. So they can undergo developmental change, particularly in like the early years area, from kind of 4 to kind of 7. And these are all things like they make it real. They bring about emotional responses. So Cleary was talking about an example of a girl that had used there was a learning task that involved some poetry, and they were looking at certain types of flowers, and it brought about this recollection of a memory of her with her grandmother, and she wrote some poetry about it. And she's going to remember that learning experience for a very long time, if not for the rest of her life. And so it's about making these internal, inspiring, I guess, like emotive feelings that bring about the motivation. And it's potentially seen as a bit fluffy, but there is a real kind of psychological, there are, a real kind of psychological tangents where this research is happening. And it's really exciting, because it means that if you can conjure that up in your learning experiences and your pedagogical practice, then it means that you are enabling these children to experience real, deep, powerful learning. There you go.
Absolutely. I love that. Not fluffy at all. I love all that. Is there anyone else who'd like to share kind of what happened in there? I think we had 2 other groups, correct? Did someone from the other group want to share?
Well, I don't mind sharing a bit about what Marcus and I spoke about, because we talked about some of the challenges that we face in terms of what we call the shiny new toy syndrome, that teachers who work in regular schools have, in addition to the challenges that Natalie was speaking about earlier, also the challenges that come with the catchphrases, the buzzwords in education that keep changing. New apps or new areas of interest that don't always align perfectly with working with sustainability. And Marcus brought this up, and I think that's a real challenge for teachers, that the next new shiny topic or approach can be difficult to integrate with working with sustainability.
Can I just add to that? I know it's not my group. Can I just possibly add to that and just say that I think so much of the time education is constantly changing, depends on different political agendas. And I think a lot of teachers are somewhat exasperated by, oh, it's this again, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. How much am I going to invest in this, because how long am I going to be doing it for? And it is a real question, I think, with practitioners, that with this ever-changing curricula, you know, how much is a teacher who doesn't know a lot about sustainability going to invest in knowing about it if they think it's a long-term investment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Marcus could speak to that more than I can, because obviously we spend a lot of time on sustainability, but teachers who are in the system have these challenges, and they're very real. They're not fluffy.
Yeah, I think teachers, I know a lot of teachers who are upset at the moment about everything, you know. We're being told, or they're being told, we have to be more STEM, or we have to focus on arts, or we have to focus on this or that. So 5 years ago, as I mentioned, 5 years ago, everybody said, you know, focus on green school, green school, green school, green school. And then it just died down. So I think teachers have been burned from that. Well, they put so much time and effort into this, and now it's forgotten about. But also what we were talking about before is what we're doing about sustainable education. And I think in the last year, we were talking about sustainability in a different way, whereby this year in Europe, it's all about being about refugees and migration. And then after that, there's been this wave of racism around Europe. So I think a lot of teachers have been focusing on that rather than environment sustainability. Or we've been looking at Me Too movement and sexism and gender and all this. And now that's a new wave at the moment. So it will come around again, but at the moment, because there's these other issues in the eye at the moment, I think the environment sustainability has gone out the window for the time being. I'm not saying it should, I'm just saying it has, due to the media and what has happened in the last year.
Can I say something to that? I'm not a specialist in any sense with sustainability in the background, but I think the idea for starting conversations like this and doing thematic talks was to get the discourse back onto important things. And like, I'm happy that we are coming together and discussing this, and potentially we can build partnership and ways to take it forward, because there are people like Cleary and Karen who are working in sustainability along with our other HundrED innovators. But yes, it is slowly disappearing from the discourse, and we have to kind of get it back. And hopefully with the spotlight, as well as conversations like this, we'll be able to figure out ways and ideate together on how to get it back. But I do agree with Marcus that it's changing, but at the same time, the world is changing. So we just have to figure out how to balance multiple things. And it's sometimes really hard. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I just wanted to validate and say, I hear you, and we're going to try and fix some of that.
Yeah, I think what Elizabeth mentioned, what we were discussing too, was how politicized it's become in America, especially, that climate change, which wasn't always a political issue, has suddenly become that, and that people are very sensitive to when you call out, when you discuss how the way you eat affects our global community and things like that, that people take that very personally. Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but that's hard for teachers to navigate as well, of how much can you teach and still keeping your stakeholders and I call them clients, although that's a very cold word for parents and students, how to still keep them with you and trusting you. It's a very sticky boundary. So I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add. If not, I'm going to hand it over to kind of where do we go from here and what's coming up next for these spotlights.
I'll just add one more thing to what you were saying, and that is that from the experience I've had and working with teachers in a lot of schools, is that one way to navigate that that kind of gray zone, per se, of kind of not knowing how to tackle certain issues when things become incredibly personal, is sometimes to take it to a global perspective. Because when you can do that, it kind of allows a little bit of space for students to recognize an issue, but when it's done through a different culture, something inherently becomes, the empathy comes in, but also it is personal, but it also kind of allows a little space between, so that there's a little bit more wiggle room to kind of allow for that connection to make.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I love that. If you look at it if you say, we're not talking about you, we're talking about them, but also if you can find a bit of you in there, that would be helpful. That's wonderful. All right, so I'm going to hand it over and we can kind of discuss what's coming next.
Yes, I can really quickly, of course, whoa, that's the wrong screen I want to share. This one, sorry. But yeah, like we've been discussing a lot about sustainability, and we realized we wanted to do the spotlight on it because it's a topic that's crucial, and we want more conversations that are happening in this sphere. So again, because this group is full of 100 ambassadors, 100 innovators, and just community members who are encouraging us and supporting us in the work we do, there are all these innovations out there, which if you feel like you need to try in your classrooms, in your schools, or otherwise just share with your network, please feel to do that, because there are lots of ideas out there, and I know sometimes it feels like you don't know where to start, but maybe these are some things to explore. But again, like I want to thank everyone who was part of this discussion. And we had 26 people who signed up, but the timing, I think, has been at a global level, I guess, not feasible for many people to join. But I'm very excited that all of you are here and you had such great insights and discussions into the group through the chat or in like smaller groups or through video. So thank you so much. Just few things that I wanted to share was that I will be sharing a feedback form tomorrow. It's 11:30 at night here, so maybe not now, but tomorrow I would share a feedback form. So if you have any suggestions on how to do this better or what else we can add in these calls, because there's no point just discussing themes and then ending it. Like, would we want to continue our discussions, do some sort of email chain where we can connect with each other? Just please leave that in the feedback form so that we can take this forward. And do suggest, I see Elizabeth is already leaving her Twitter handle. Oh, not just Elizabeth, quite a few people. So that's great. And I think we should definitely stay in touch and keep these discussions going forward, as well as Randi already said, we have the sustainability spotlight coming up, and the application round is right now open. So if you know of any innovations that are doing great work in the field of sustainability, please ask them to join and apply. And for Karen and Cleary, I think you guys should also, if you haven't already, because you guys are doing incredible work and we need the world to, of course, know about it. And just to kind of close it off, we're going to do these kind of thematic talks every month, and these are all needed topics that need to be discussed with all sorts of stakeholders in the education space. And the next one, which will now happen in June, will be on the theme of inclusion. So if you have any suggestions, people who we should invite for these calls, innovations that you know are doing great work, please send me an email or leave it on the feedback form. I'll leave some space for that as well. But yeah, that's all, I guess, from me. And I just really want to say thank you to Randi for hosting this, for Karen and Cleary for sharing your innovations, and a big shout out to Marcus and Jordi, who have been helping me plan these thematic talks. And it's, as I said, around 11:30 at night. And it's a public holiday in Finland, but these guys are still here and indulging in this conversation. So thank you very much for being a part of this conversation.